The wind howled through the cemetery like a grieving spirit, curling around Ethan Carter's ankles as he stood motionless by his mother's grave. The sky was overcast, thick with the threat of rain, as though nature itself refused to shine on a day so steeped in sorrow. He watched in silence as the casket, a polished oak box far too beautiful to be buried, was lowered into the ground. It felt final, brutal, as if something sacred had been ripped from the world. Beside him, his father, David Carter, stared straight ahead. His expression was unreadable, cold, almost mechanical. No tears, no trembling chin, just a stoic silence that unsettled Ethan more than any breakdown ever could. David's hand rested stiffly on Ethan's shoulder, but the gesture felt hollow, like muscle memory rather than comfort. Ethan's mind drifted. How could it not? Just 3 months ago, their kitchen had been filled with the scent of his mom's homemade cinnamon bread. Her laughter had echoed through the house, like music. She used to sing while she cleaned, hum while she chopped vegetables. Now there was only silence. The kind of silence that sinks into the walls and whispers in the night. He hadn't cried yet. Not fully. He'd teared up when the doctor delivered the news, pancreatic cancer, caught too late, but he hadn't let it out. It festered somewhere deep, coiled like a snake, waiting to strike. After the funeral, they returned home. A house too large for 2 people, too quiet without her voice. The air smelled faintly of her perfume, and Ethan couldn't bring himself to throw away her robe that still hung on the back of the bathroom door. Rachel was waiting in the living room. She stood when they entered, her arms open, her face soft with concern. "Ethan," she whispered, and he collapsed into her embrace. Rachel Donovan had been with him for nearly 4 years. They met in college, survived long distance for a while, and eventually moved into an apartment near his parent house. She was a stabilizing force in his life, empathetic, intelligent, and relentlessly supportive. For the next few weeks, Rachel became an anchor not just for Ethan, but surprisingly, for David as well. She stopped by daily, sometimes bringing dinner, sometimes just sitting in the living room, making light conversation. David, usually reserved and private, began opening up to her in small ways, little stories about his younger days, his regrets, his dreams deferred. At first, Ethan found it heartwarming. It was comforting to see his father respond to someone. But over time, something began to shift. It started subtly. David laughed more often when Rachel was around. A deeper kind of laughter, not the dry chuckles Ethan had grown used to. Rachel, in turn, seemed brighter in David's presence. She engaged more with his stories than she ever had with Ethan's. Sometimes they spoke in the kitchen while Ethan was in another room, their voices hushed but animated. When he walked in, the conversation would stop, or veer into mundane territory. One evening, Ethan walked into the dining room to find Rachel and David sitting unusually close. Nothing explicit, but their body language was intimate. David's hand lingered on Rachel's forearm as she laughed at something he'd said. A low, throaty laugh Ethan hadn't heard from her in weeks. He cleared his throat, and both of them glanced up, startled. Rachel smiled, but David's expression was unreadable again, like it had been at the funeral. "I didn't hear you come in," Rachel said, smoothing her hair. "I live here," Ethan replied, not unkindly. "What's for dinner?" Rachel stood. "I made your mom's lasagna." I figured, well, maybe it'd feel familiar. It did. Too familiar. And suddenly painfully wrong. That night, as they sat around the dinner table, David poured himself an extra glass of wine. Then another. His cheeks flushed as he spoke with uncharacteristic looseness, reminiscing about the early days of his marriage. Rachel listened intently, her eyes soft, her smile lingering longer than Ethan liked. Halfway through the meal, David set his fork down and looked at Ethan, his voice low and deliberate. "Son, I've been thinking." Ethan looked up, wary. "About what?" "About you and Rachel. About how sometimes people outgrow each other." Ethan blinked. "What are you talking about?" David swirled the wine in his glass. "She's a remarkable woman. And I mean, she's been there for both of us, more than anyone else. She's mature. More than most girls your age. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. Dad, what are you saying? I'm saying maybe you should think about letting her go. She deserves someone who sees her, really sees her. His voice dropped further. We connect, Ethan, on a level you don't understand. The silence that followed was so dense it was suffocating. Ethan stared at his father, his brain refusing to process the words. Are you drunk? He asked, his voice trembling with disbelief. David leaned back, his gaze unwavering. A little. Doesn't mean I'm lying. Rachel sat frozen, eyes wide, her fork suspended halfway to her mouth. Ethan stood slowly. This isn't funny. I'm not laughing, David replied calmly. Ethan looked at Rachel. Did you know he was going to say this? Her lips parted, but no words came out. Ethan didn't wait for an answer. He walked away, each step echoing in the hall like a closing door. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The house felt like a stranger's. Rachel came to check on him once, but he pretended to be asleep. He didn't want to see her. He didn't want to see either of them. Was his father serious? Had grief warped his mind to the point where he thought that kind of betrayal was justifiable? And Rachel, had she encouraged it? Or was she just caught in something she didn't understand? The questions circled in his mind until dawn broke, pale and gray. Ethan stood by the window, watching the sky change, unsure of what had shifted more, the seasons, or the people he thought he knew. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his phone screen, Rachel's name glowing in a text bubble. She'd sent a message hours ago. Can we talk? Please. He hadn't replied. 3 days had passed since the dinner, since David's words shattered the fragile stability left in Ethan's world. Each morning, he woke hoping it had all been a misunderstanding, a drunken outburst misconstrued. But each time he looked into his father's eyes and saw no remorse, and each time Rachel entered the room with that same strained smile, the truth settled deeper, like a splinter beneath the skin. At first, Ethan tried to brush it off as grief-induced madness. Maybe David had lost touch with reality. Maybe Rachel hadn't meant to give off any strange signals. But denial only worked when you weren't paying attention. And Ethan had started watching closely. Rachel moved through the house like she was keeping a secret. She took more calls in private, locked her phone when she never had before. Once, Ethan caught her whispering behind a closed door, her voice low and urgent. As he passed by, she went silent. The next moment, she opened the door with a forced smile. Everything okay? He asked. Yeah, she said quickly. Just talking to Lila. She's going through something. But Ethan knew Lila's voice, and the one on the phone hadn't been hers. That night, sleep came in fractured pieces. His mind kept circling back to what David had said. The way Rachel had frozen. The absence of denial. He needed to know if his instincts were betraying him, or if they were finally waking up. The next day, under the guise of increasing home security, Ethan installed a small camera above the kitchen cabinets. It had motion detection and sound, tucked away behind a forgotten jar of cloves. He told himself it was paranoia, that he was being dramatic. But a part of him, a dark, wounded part, needed confirmation. 2 nights later, the footage proved his worst fears. He sat alone in the dark, his laptop screen the only source of light. The video showed Rachel and David in the kitchen, standing close. Rachel was barefoot, dressed in one of Ethan's old t-shirts, her hair still damp from a shower. David leaned against the counter, glass of scotch in hand. You look just like her sometimes, he murmured. Rachel smiled faintly, eyes cast down. Don't say that. I mean it. The way you care. It reminds me of Claire. Ethan watched, breath caught in his throat. Then David reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. Rachel didn't flinch. She leaned into his touch. And then, God, she kissed him. Not a mistake, not a quick peck. A slow, deliberate kiss that spoke of familiarity, of shared secrets and late-night conversations. When they parted, David whispered, "He'll never know." Ethan closed the laptop. His heart pounded, not from anger, but from disbelief. He had the proof. And yet, it didn't feel real. How had this happened under his roof? With the two people he trusted most? The next morning, he confronted Rachel. Calmly, deliberately, like someone who'd rehearsed the scene 100 times in their mind. She was in the kitchen making coffee. She looked up when he entered, startled by the intensity in his gaze. "Do you love him?" he asked without preamble. She froze. "What?" "My father. Do you love him?" Her hand trembled. The spoon clinked against the mug. "Ethan? What are you talking about?" "I saw the footage," he said evenly. "I know everything." Rachel went pale. Her breath caught, and her shoulders slumped like the air had been punched from her lungs. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered. "But it did." "It started after the funeral," she said quietly. "I came over to help, to be there for you. But you shut down. You barely looked at me."
He did.
He listened.
He needed me.
"And you needed what? Validation?" Ethan's voice cracked. "From my father?" Rachel's eyes welled with tears. "It wasn't planned. I didn't even realize what was happening until it already had." "Do you love him?" he asked again. She hesitated. "I don't know. I don't think so. But I needed someone, and he filled a space you wouldn't." Ethan stared at her, anger swirling with heartbreak. "So that's your excuse?" "I was grieving wrong. So you betrayed me?" "No," she cried. "It wasn't like that. I love you, Ethan. I still do." He shook his head slowly.
No.
"You love the idea of saving someone. And when I didn't let you save me, you turned to someone who would." She reached out, but he stepped back. "Don't." Later that evening, Ethan confronted David. He found him in the garage, working on a rusted lawnmower, as if nothing in the world had changed. "I know," Ethan said, "about you and Rachel." David didn't look up. "I figured. I saw the footage." David stood and wiped his hands on a rag. "You shouldn't have done that." "I shouldn't have needed to," Ethan snapped. "She was my girlfriend. You're my father. What kind of man does this?" David's gaze met his, unapologetic. "One who's lost everything." Ethan's chest tightened. "So, you decided to take the one thing I had left." "She's not a thing. She made her own choices." "You encouraged them," Ethan said. "You made her feel seen. You played the grieving widower well, she forgot she was mine." David stepped closer. "You're young, Ethan. One day you'll understand how lonely life can get."
No.
"I hope I never do." David frowned. "You'll forgive me. Someday." "I don't think I will," Ethan said. "And I don't think I want to." He turned and walked out of the garage, leaving his father in the dim yellow glow of a flickering bulb. That night, Ethan packed a bag. Clothes, toiletries, his laptop. He left a note on the kitchen counter, not for closure, but for distance. "Don't contact me. I need space. Maybe forever." He didn't know where he was going. He didn't care. He just knew he couldn't stay in that house, couldn't breathe under that roof, where betrayal clung to every surface like mold. As he drove away, the sky finally cracked open and rain poured down in sheets. It felt cleansing somehow, like a release. But no amount of rain could wash away what had been done. The motel room was barely more than a box with beige walls and the distant hum of traffic outside. Ethan had been staying there for 5 days, and the novelty of solitude had worn off. He spent most of his time lying on the thin mattress, scrolling through his phone without purpose, replaying every moment from the past 2 weeks like a broken reel. He hadn't responded to Rachel's texts. He'd blocked David's number. Every vibration of his phone stirred a flicker of dread in his chest, a reflex now. The betrayal still burned, raw and unresolved, but beneath the anger, a new question had started to surface. What now? His world had been torn in two. The loss of his mother had carved a deep wound, but what Rachel and David had done, it had salted that wound, made healing feel impossible. And yet, despite the pain, the world hadn't stopped spinning. Bills still needed paying. Work emails kept arriving. Life, in its indifferent cruelty, continued. That morning, Ethan found himself walking aimlessly through the town park where his mother used to take him as a child. He sat on a bench near the pond, watching ducks glide over the surface like nothing in the world could touch them. For the first time in weeks, his thoughts quieted. He didn't hear her approach. "Ethan," came Rachel's voice, soft and hesitant. His body stiffened. He turned slowly to see her standing a few feet away, raincoat wrapped tightly around her frame, eyes red and swollen. "Ask the motel manager where you were. He said he saw you leave this way." He didn't answer, didn't invite her to sit. Still, she lowered herself onto the bench beside him, careful not to get too close. "I know you don't want to see me," she said, voice trembling. "But I needed to try to explain." "There's nothing left to explain," Ethan said without looking at her. "You made your choice." "I didn't choose him over you," she said quickly. I was grieving too. I lost your mom. She meant a lot to me. And you shut down. I felt invisible." "I was mourning my mother," he said, finally turning toward her, eyes flaring. "I didn't know I had to perform grief in a way that made you feel special." Rachel flinched but didn't look away. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. But I want you to know it wasn't about love. Not with him. It was confusion. Loneliness. I got caught in the wrong kind of comfort." "You think that makes it better?" Ethan asked. "That it wasn't love? That it was just weakness?" "I think it makes it human." They sat in silence, the wind rustling the leaves overhead. "I'm leaving town," Rachel said after a long pause. "I got a job offer in Portland. I think I need to go. Start over." Ethan nodded slowly. "That's probably best." She looked at him, tears clinging to her lashes. "I'll always be sorry. I hope one day you can find peace." He didn't reply. She stood and walked away, each step echoing like the final notes of a song he never wanted to hear again. 2 weeks later, Ethan returned to the house, not because he wanted to, but because there were things he had to collect. His name was still on some of the documents, and practicalities had to be faced. David was home when he arrived. The air was thick with unease. David stood in the living room, hands clasped behind his back. "You look better," he said. "I didn't come to talk," Ethan replied. "I'm just here for my things." David nodded. "I figured." Ethan moved through the house quickly, grabbing boxes he'd left, clearing drawers, yanking photos off the walls. Every room felt like it had been scrubbed of warmth. His mother's touches, her plants, her candles, her framed recipes, were gone, replaced with cold modernity and David's usual preference for sleek minimalism. "Did she mean anything to you?" Ethan asked abruptly, turning to face his father. "Rachel, was it just convenient?" David's mouth tightened. "It was a mistake. That's not an answer." David sighed. "She was someone to talk to. Someone who didn't look at me like I was broken. We both lost Claire. We connected over that. But it wasn't love." "Then why destroy everything for it?" Ethan asked, voice low and bitter. David hesitated. "I think part of me wanted to feel relevant. I spent so much time being your mother's husband, then being your father. When she died, I didn't know who I was anymore." "You don't find yourself in someone else's partner," Ethan said. "You lose yourself there." David nodded. "I know. I'm sorry." Ethan didn't respond. There were no words that could sew that wound shut. As he loaded the last box into his car, David stood at the porch. "You'll never forgive me, will you?" Ethan stared at him. "I'm not sure forgiveness is something I owe you. Or her. Maybe one day I'll let go of the anger. But I'll never forget." He closed the trunk and drove away, leaving the house and the ghosts of what had been behind him. 6 months later, Ethan stood in a new apartment overlooking the city skyline. The walls were bare, the furniture minimal, but the space was his. He'd started therapy. He'd begun journaling again, something his mother always encouraged. Slowly, piece by piece, he was rebuilding. He didn't hear from Rachel again. Word reached him that she'd settled well in Portland, that she'd joined a nonprofit and seemed to be doing fine. David occasionally sent emails, short updates, mostly hollow, attempts at reconnection. Ethan never responded. But life moved on. It had to. One crisp autumn afternoon, he visited his mother's grave. He brought cinnamon bread, homemade this time. He sat beside the headstone, the smell of warm spices curling into the air. "I miss you," he said softly. "You always said people show who they are in grief. I think you were right. I learned a lot, lost a lot, but I'm still here." A breeze rustled the trees overhead, and for a moment, he could almost hear her humming. Ethan smiled faintly, stood, and placed the small slice of bread at the base of her grave. "I'm moving forward," he whispered. "I hope you'd be proud." He walked away, lighter than he had been in months.